Today we're looking at Nintendo's newest, shiniest, most exciting old retro throwback console, the Nintendo Classic Mini Game Boy. Enjoy! So, Nintendo have been releasing classic consoles every single year since 2 years ago when they released the NES. Then they released the SNES this year. In fact, it was last year they released the SNES this year, and maybe another one next year. Now, they haven't denied the fact that they're not going to release it. That's a double negative. They are keeping quiet on it. In fact, they've been keeping quiet on the whole line. They've been talking about the Switch, the 3DS, their mobile aspirations, but they have not talked about what the classic console will be next year. And this is what happens with patterns. People notice patterns. They notice it with the iPhone. They notice it with Microsoft, with Sony. They see patterns emerging and going, oh, what's going to be next? Now, the thing that I think will be next is the Game Boy. The Game Boy is a classic console that needs to come back as a matter of urgency, way more than the other options Nintendo has on its shelf. I think the N64 has a very good shout of being the next console. I just think the Game Boy pips it. Everyone is excited about the Game Boy. The Game Boy is the thing that people want. Yes, the NES, the SNES, they were two very obvious first choices for Nintendo, and I think the Game Boy is the third obvious choice, the third console that they can bring back. It has been way too long without a Game Boy for Nintendo just to sit it on the shelf and get us to forget about it. But let's go back through the basics. So the NES was the first thing released, and it was released in Japan 1983, US 1985, EU 1986. That was Nintendo's first console. That was their big thing. That was their big risk. They're a company who make cards, and then they made the Game & Watch and a few other arcade machines, but then they were like, yes, let's get a piece of this action. Bye bye Atari, I'm taking over. In fact, they nearly had partnerships with a whole load of companies. However, they decided to go for it alone because of some licensing issues, whatever. Let's not go into that. However, that's their big thing. That's their starting point of the modern Nintendo. So that was going to be their first one. The next one, though, the SNES, was very, very similar to the NES. It had very similar ports, very similar size, very similar chips. So that was obviously going to be their next move. It was a very easy console to make after doing the NES. It had the same controller ports, the same HDMI ports, the same everything. I mean, the thing is a thing of beauty. I mean, look at that. Now, the next thing after this, after the SNES Mini, what is it going to be? And that's the million-dollar question. In fact, it's not a million-dollar question at all. It's just an interesting thing to think about at this point. Well, I think it's got to be the Game Boy. Now, if you look at the date, yes, it's slightly before the SNES, but knowing that the SNES was so much easier to create after creating the NES, the Game Boy is not going to be that easy in relation to the SNES. However, a lot of you will be thinking, what about the N64? Maybe Nintendo are just looking at consoles. The problem with the N64 is it's not as easy as the NES to SNES transition. If you think about the Raspberry Pi 3, which is the most modern Raspberry Pi, the most modern one, it doesn't run N64 games very well at all. In fact, it doesn't run an awful lot of them at all. And this is the modern thing. This is the greatest computer of its price, and yet it doesn't run them. And this is going to be Nintendo's problem, is they'll have to spend a lot more on the board, and the board is what costs the price. So Nintendo might look at it and go, well, I'm not quite sure we want to sell these at $150 instead of the sort of 100 or whatever the other consoles were. they might not want that jump up because they'll be thinking, well, this is going well so far. The NES and the SNES, yes, financially it probably is making Nintendo an awful lot of money, but it's keeping them in the headlines. It's keeping people excited about their brands. And this is the whole point of this. Nintendo don't really care how many of these are sold, I am sure. As long as people are talking about Nintendo, Nintendo are very happy. And what better console to bring out to get people talking than the Game Boy? I'm just absolutely certain this is what Nintendo are going to do. Now you might say to me, but Nintendo don't really need that at the moment with the success of the Switch, and you might be right. In fact, the success of the Switch might stop this entirely. However, there's very little point in this video if they're not going to do it at all. So we'll carry on. So next thing to think about is, what is it going to look like? Well, the three Game Boys on the shelf are the Game Boy Pocket, and the Game Boy Pocket Lite. The next one after that was the Game Boy Color. I don't think Nintendo will go down the color route. I think they'll leave that in the bank, think, oh, maybe we'll go to the color route later on. There was a lot of different games for the color than for the Game Boy. However, they might merge the two together, but for the purposes of the video, I'm pretending they're not going to. So they're going to bring something from each of these three things. Now Nintendo, looking at the SNES and the NES, are all about brand. I mean, you can see that brand in there. Nintendo love this thing so much they've put a fake eject button in. It doesn't actually do anything, but they knew it would look unusual. They knew it wouldn't look like a SNES without that button, so they've put it in. They've put it in because their brand is that strong. So the middle Game Boy is their brand for the Game Boy. That's the thing that people look at and go, that's a Game Boy. So that's what that's bringing to the table. The brand, the colour, the style. That middle one is the most important of those three. However, the Game Boy Lite, the Game Boy Pocket will bring the miniaturisation of the Game Boy there. Clearly this is a mini console, so it's going to be smaller. And so they'll look at that and go, right, yeah, how did we make that so small? And the Game Boy Lite, which is Japanese only, I think it was released, is going to bring that light on the screen. My goodness, those magnifying glasses with the lights on that you used to plug on top of the Game Boy, no more. We don't need those anymore. Those were hideous, horrible. And trying to play a Game Boy, for those of you who don't know, it didn't have a light on it. So when you played it at night, you couldn't see the thing. And when you played it in the sun, it was too shiny. It was like reading a book that someone had put plastic over. It made no sense at all. I think looking back, we look at it with fond memories. Actually, if we had to relive those memories, I think we'd remember how rubbish that screen was. Anyway, so each of those three things is going to bring something to the table, and maybe Nintendo will pay homage to all three of them in the creation of it, but it will look as close to the middle one as they can, as close to the original, the one that really started this off for Nintendo. So looking at what I think it will look like, something like this. Okay, so if we have a look at this in a bit more detail, we can see that the screen is making up over half of the device, and I think that the screen will be by far the biggest aspect of this. In fact, if I put this next to the old Game Boy, you can see the scale of it. If I just enlarge the old Game Boy to a similar size and put it next to it, you can see how small this is in comparison. But have a look at how it's so small. Look at all this dead space around the Game Boy here. All of that will go. Yes, we're worried about brand, but we're also worried about miniaturizing it. So all of that can go. Let's see what else. The height of it here, I mean, that is way too big. So that's all shrunk down to make it a lot more small. So those are the kind of different changes on this. I mean, if we look at this, there's probably going to be a volume slider on the side. They used to have a wheel. I don't think they'll have a wheel anymore. I think they'll just reuse the same one they used on the 3DS. You can also see that the start and select buttons aren't diagonal anymore. I never understood why they were diagonal in the first place, but I think to fit all this stuff in, I think that they're going to have to be a horizontal. And you can see a few other minor changes just to miniaturize this. The battery light there, I think that will be up there if they're going to have it at all. I do think when you switch this machine on, there'll be a kind of homage to it. It will load like that, and they'll have the battery thing there, you know, just for a loading screen, and the dot matrix thing at the top, like that. And it will just be there just as a bit of a nod to the original Game Boy, but as soon as you're playing a game, it will go, and it's that simple. In terms of ports, there'll be 2 ports. There'll be a headphone jack at the bottom. Okay, just put 2 fingers up to Apple with their iPhone, and they'll also have a charging dock. And the headphones might be on the side, but I think they'll probably be at the bottom, and the charging dock will be maybe USB-C or something, or a similar one to they used on the SNES and the NES Classic editions. So that's what I think it will look like. I think it will look similar to that. The only issue they have is making sure that you can get your fingers on the buttons and that it's comfortable, because this kind of needs to be comfortable as well. And Nintendo are all about the detail. They don't release substandard consoles. If you look at the NES and SNES, they're incredibly well built with an awful lot of things in mind. So that's what I think it will look like. But one thing I really haven't discussed is the HDMI cable, because this is something that a lot of the knockoffs have, and Nintendo will look at that and go, do I want the HDMI cable dangling from it like that? I think a lot of them have them at the bottom dangling, or from the top dangling between you and your TV. That doesn't seem like Nintendo at all. I think Nintendo would never ever do that. However, I think something that Nintendo might do is have a dock, which I have here, and that you, just like the Switch, you put the Game Boy in the dock and you plug in a controller, you plug in an HDMI cable. I don't have a graphic for a controller, but you can all imagine what that looks like. And there you go. Now, the Game Boy is only inherently one player, so there's no point of having 2 controller things unless they find some way of doing the link cable and making the Game Boy think it's 2 Game Boys, or they might even include a link cable here that you can link up 2 things together, or they might have the link cable on the device itself. I think that given the fact that they've released 2 controllers for the SNES, they are thinking multiplayer, and they are probably thinking that way. But in terms of that, why not use Wi-Fi? Why not have these things connect using Wi-Fi? Because that seems an awful lot more modern, and these are supposed to be modern takes on the classics. I think it will either be Bluetooth or Wi-Fi or something like that, some wireless way of doing it. But in terms of this this stand, I think it would just have an HDMI, a power, and a controller thing, and it will be able to play these things on the TV, which will be exciting, and an awful lot of people are waiting for something like this to come out, that they can play their classic Game Boy games on a widescreen TV, and this will be the way of doing it. In terms of the actual games themselves, now Nintendo, I said before, won't have the dot matrix display. It will be a modern display. It costs too much to bring out the dot matrix displays. Modern displays are so much more cheap for Nintendo. So this gives them an opportunity to bring colour to their old classic games, which they did when they released the Super Game Boy for the SNES. In the Super Game Boy, you even got to pick your colours that you wanted for the games. So you can have Donkey Kong as, I don't know, green or red or purple or whatever you wanted. So you could pick your different colours, and there's a little animation here. I think Nintendo might look at their limited game range and think, oh, hang on, we've only got 20 games here. Surely we can make these look better and pick the colours more specifically. Maybe Nintendo are working through these 20 games and making sure they look absolutely amazing. I mean, if we bring up Mario Land again, that kind of looks a bit crummy. Yes, it's really clever that they've managed to get the different colours in for a game that was released quite early on. But, I mean, look at the colours. What is that? Orange and green. It's an interesting choice. I know that they were limited with the amount of colour that they could put on or retrofit to these games, but maybe Nintendo have an opportunity here to kind of right that wrong from the past. It would be interesting. Whatever happens, there'll be a mode that you can switch on that hideous green and black display. I'm sure of it. But Yeah, very, very interesting to hypothesize what the games will look like. I think there will be about 20 to 30 games. I don't think they will go any further than that. They do not have the same issues they have if they release the N64 in terms of licensing. They've got a huge library of games that they could pick from. So I think that this seems to be the next console that Nintendo are going to release. And I'm really, really excited to see this thing. I will buy it on day one. But how likely in terms of our scale is this of happening? Well, I definitely don't think it's impossible. I think that Nintendo are clearly setting up a pattern for us. So I think that it's not impossible. But I wouldn't say very likely or certain at all. I think the N64 is still on the table. I think Nintendo have their work cut out for them with the Switch, so they might not want to go down this road at all. They might go, we only intended to release those first two, the other consoles aren't classic anymore. However, with the fact that the Game Boy brand has died when they released the DS, that was supposed to be a third channel for Nintendo with the console, the Game Boy and the DS working together, but then the DS did so well, Nintendo said bye bye Game Boy and replaced it with the DS. Have a look at now with the Switch and the 3DS. Maybe the Switch is kind of saying goodbye to the 3DS. So Nintendo have precedent of just discontinuing the old and going bye bye. But this is their opportunity to right that wrong and go, yeah, all right, we said goodbye to the Game Boy, but we love the thing. The thing brought an awful lot of money to Nintendo. When times have been really, really tough, Wii U, when times have been really, really tough with Nintendo, they've always relied on the handheld sales. It's always kept them in contact with the publishers, and they had a wealth of publishers with the 3DS, when actually the publishers with the Wii U were starting to move away from Nintendo. So this is going to be a really, really cool homage to something that I think Nintendo has looked back on fondly and has remembered for really, really great business decisions. When the thing was released, everyone looked at it and went, this graphics are rubbish. The Mega Drive and the SNES coming out next year, the graphics are so much better. And Nintendo just sat happy because they watched the competition, the Game Gear with its hour battery life or whatever that had on it. They watched and they said, well, we've got the better games, and the better games will always win. So I think this has a good chance. I don't think it's very likely. I don't think it's certain. I think it's got a good chance of happening in 2018. I do think that it is certain to happen in the next decade. It is definitely going to happen if you increase the timescale. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you like it, please click like. If you really like it, please click subscribe. Thank you.